Hello everybody and welcome back to X-Plane 11. My name is Micah. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use the autopilot in the Boeing 737-800 Zibo Mod. As I've covered previously, we covered the cold dark startup and we also covered the FMC programming. Today we're just going to be covering just the autopilot. So that's taking off with autopilot, using the different climb modes, and then descending and also doing an ILS approach using the autopilot. Now, there's a lot of different options with the autopilot, everything from doing RNAV approaches, doing lock approaches, ILS approaches, visual approaches, departures. You can depart with derates, you can depart with TOGA. I mean, there's a lot of options here. I'm going to show you guys the most common uses. I'm not going to get into a whole ridiculous bunch of detail as you can get when you start talking about autopilot and all of its features. But let's start from left to right, and we're going to go over the MCP, which is the control panel basically for all the autopilot features and things like that. We're going to start over here on the left, and you're going to see a course. This is your course for your VOR/ILS. This would be the course that you would put in if you're departing using a VOR departure, or if you're doing going to a VOR, or if you're doing an ILS approach or a VOR lock approach. You would put that course into the course right here. That is also mimicked over here on the first officer side. If you're using a first officer side, that would be where you put the course. Now, we'll get to that in a second. Then you have your flight director. Your flight director is basically these little lines that'll pop up here to actually guide you on your flight. You'll notice that if you turn on only on the captain side, it's only going to show up on the captain side. On the right side, you'll also see it pop up on the first officer side. Then you have auto throttle. This is to arm the auto throttle, or to activate it, or to turn it off. Then you have different buttons here for the auto throttle. So this is all of this little box right here with these lines coming out. These are all of your options for your throttle with your autopilot. So start with an N1. What is N1? N1 means that is going to basically give you maximum N1 thrust based off of your climb or takeoff derate. For example, right now programmed in my FMC, you'll see 95 is the current, so it'll go up. N1 will go all the way up to 95, where you see that green little triangle looking thing. Let's get a little better view of that. This little like Y looking symbol, that is 95, and so it'll go all the way up to that 95 when I hit N1. Speed is going to set your aircraft to fly whatever speed you have in this little box right here, whether it be 168, 200, 280, whatever. It's going to fly the aircraft at that speed. It's going to manipulate the engines for that speed. Now, C and O, this changes it between your actual indicated airspeed and Mach number. When you start getting up into higher altitudes and cruising, you'll be using Mach numbers for most of your flying there. So not indicated airspeed. As you know, as you get higher, the actual air mass gets less, so your indicated airspeed becomes less, I wouldn't say less accurate of your speed, but less, I guess it is kind of less accurate of your speed. So the higher you get, normally you'll switch over to Mach, and you'll do it based off Mach. This, of course, is your knob. You can adjust your speed with that. Allows you to adjust that number there. Speed interval, that is kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of the actual FMC and how everything works there. Let's see if I have one on here on my legs page. Right, so Westla 230 below, that is giving me a speed constraint on that waypoint. So if I wanted to ignore that speed constraint on my climb up, I could hit speed interval, and that's going to basically jump over that next speed limit. So it says 300, stay below 230 knots. I could say ignore that while maintaining the same VNAV and LNAV climb. Now we'll get that in a second. Level change. Level change is basically going to say, okay, we are going to either decrease in altitude or increase in altitude based off of speed. So it'll say, you could say, I wanted to climb at 250 knots, right? I want to climb at 250 knots, and I hit level change. What that's going to do, let me get rid of that whole thing. Let's say 230 knots. How about that? Hit level change. What that's going to do is that's going to pitch the aircraft within one speed to achieve that indicated airspeed on the level change. So either whether climbing or descending. So if I wanted to, descend at 280 knots, I select level change. It's going to descend me based off of the speed. That's what level change is. It's climbing or descending based off the speed, the indicated airspeed of your aircraft, not any other factors. Let me get this back to where I had it. What is vertical navigation? Vertical navigation basically is a computed system based off of your FMC, what your restrictions are. It's going to look at your plan here and say, okay, at Westla, I need to be below 230 knots, above 2,000 feet. So it's going to do calculations and get you in accordance with those constraints to actually get you in accordance with those constraints. So that includes both ascent and descent. So it will help guide you on climbing and descending off of cruise. Heading select, as you might expect, this is your heading knob here. This second knob here is your, what do they call it? I can't remember exactly what they call it. Basically, it indicates what degrees it'll allow your aircraft to make turns. Below 30,000 feet, 25 degrees is common. Above 30,000 feet, you reduce that to 10 because, again, less mass in the air. That means that if you make really sharp turns, you're going to lose altitude based off of pressure. So anyways, you want to keep about 25 up to 30,000 feet and then switch over to 10 above 30,000 feet. And again, heading is just going to give you whatever heading you want to fly at. Let's say, the runway heading is 284. I hit heading select. My aircraft's going to fly that heading. It's going to ignore everything else and fly just that heading. If I want to go 270, I would just manipulate the knob to go 270 and then select heading select, and it's going to fly me that heading. Back to 284 here. Lateral navigation is kind of a automated heading. It basically is going to turn your aircraft left or right to bring you in alignment with your plan that you have inputted into the FMC. It's going to be what you mainly use here in the Boeing 737 to get you where you need to go until you get up to an approach or something like that. VOR lock, this is exactly what you would imagine. It locks onto a VOR radial based off of your courses that you've set, and will lock in on that and fly that heading to make sure you stay on that VOR radial. APP is your approach button. That is going to give you both horizontal and vertical guidance based off of whatever approach you're using, whether it's an RNAV or if it's an ILS approach. You would use the APP, which we'll get into that in the ILS approach later on. You have altitude hold. This is going to hold you at whatever altitude you currently are at, not what's indicated here, what you're currently at. So if you are flying up to 10,000 feet and you have set this to 10,000 and you hit altitude hold, but you're only at 7,000 feet, you're going to hold at 7,000. It's going to pitch your aircraft down and hold you back at that 7,000. It's not going to climb all the way up to 10,000. Bring this back down to 3,000. Alternate interval, alternate intervention. This speed intervention, not interval. What that's going to do is the same thing that you imagine that I talked about, the speed interval. It ignores the next constraint. So down here you see at Westla, we have 230 knots, stay below 230 knots. Speed interval, we would ignore that. And 2,000, above 2,000 feet, if I hit the altitude intervention, it's going to ignore that 2,000 foot rule. Again, it's just ignoring the next waypoint. Basically, the next waypoint constraint, you're ignoring it, saying, I don't care about that. Continue, flying as is, almost. Vertical speed. This allows you to climb based off of your vertical speed, how many feet per minute you're actually climbing at. I use this sometimes, depending on the situation. which I am sure I'll demonstrate that as we fly here. This is the knob that, of course, adjusts your vertical speed up and down associated with that. Now these right here, let's talk about this right here. You have A and B sides. Now, as you might imagine, A and B sides mean two different things. The A side is basically the captain's side of things, and the B side is the second officer's side of things. So if you're using the Command B function, you're going to be flying off the first officer's side. Command A is going to be flying off the captain's side. Yeah. So basically, CWS means control wheel steering. It basically allows you to set the pitch, attitude, and turn rate using the yoke, which the autopilot will then maintain until instructed to do otherwise. So what that means is, if I hit CWS, I can pull the yoke up to, let's say, 10 degrees, and then I let go of the yoke. It's going to maintain that 10 degrees as best it can. As far as I understand, that's how it works. I never use that, but it is an option for you. Disengage. This is going to disengage all flight control autopilot. It will not disengage auto throttle. It will disengage LNAV, VNAV, heading select, VOR lock, APP, all of that, vertical speed. It'll disengage all of that, but it will not disengage your auto throttle. So keep that in mind. You have to turn off the switch to disengage auto throttle completely. And again, we covered the flight director on the first officer side as well. So we're going to turn on our flight directors and our auto throttle before we get going here out of San Francisco. I am going to pull out on the runway now. Release my parking brake here. And let's get our lights on. And what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to show you a toga takeoff based off of my D rate. Not D rate, my selected temperature. Using this autopilot. Now, once you kind of get used to the autopilot, you'll learn all of its, options and things like that. But for example, if I wanted to take off right now and I wanted to use heading select as my autopilot feature to get a straight off heading, like for example, if ATC says take off runway heading, whatever, then I would use the heading select button to get me on the runway heading. If I wanted to go ahead and fly my flight plan that I've inputted, I would use the lateral navigation, which I'll be using today. So I'm going to arm lateral navigation. And if I wanted to use vertical navigation on my climb out, select vertical navigation, arm that. And you'll notice over here on the left, we have gotten LNAV, VNAV on this primary flight display here, letting us know it's on the bottom. It means it's armed. If it's on the top, it means it's active. So they've been armed, and our auto throttle is armed as well. And you'll notice that over on the first officer's side as well. Now that we've activated that, you'll notice something that, well, you won't notice any type of, flight director, magneto lines, or any type of, things helping you fly this. And that's because the autopilot has not actually activated yet. And you'll notice that because I have not hit the command button. Now, I will not hit the command button when I'm taking off, because when I hit toga, it will automatically activate all of that. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to increase my throttle just over 40% here. Once M1 increases over 40%, I'm going to release the parking brake, start rolling, and I'm going to hit the mic button. This is basically the toga button here, and you'll notice that N1 becomes selected, heading select is currently, and toga is on the vertical. So you got your speed, your lateral navigation, and your vertical navigation little boxes here. And you'll notice that we now have some lines that have appeared on our primary flight display that are going to help guide us as we fly. Now, we're flying manually right now. The aircraft is not flying itself. It does not fly itself on takeoff.
V1, rotate.
Alright, so we're going to rotate off the ground here. A little bit of wind here today. No big deal. We're going to get rid of that. We're gonna go gears up. And now I'm gonna watch. I'm flying it manually still, but I'm using these flight directors to actually fly the aircraft. So I'm trying to keep it nice and center on those lines right there to fly this departure. Now you notice that we are on N1, LNAV, and vertical navigation speed, VNAV speed. Now that we've passed over 1,000 feet, we can go ahead and we'll go ahead and activate our autopilot using the Command A button. And now the aircraft is completely flying itself using N1, so it's still flying based off of the maximum pressure that you can push through the aircraft. Start putting my flaps up as we go here. Don't want to have any issues with that. And it's flying the path, path there. Now, as we get up to 3,000 feet, it's going to stop at 3,000 feet on this climb out unless I increase the altitude. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the altitude to my cruising altitude. 35,000. So as we climb out, again, you'll notice that it's flying those lines, those little magneto lines, those little pink lines right there, right? We have N1 activated, which means it's going to be pushing as much thrust as it can based off of my climb rates until it reaches 230 knots. It's going to continue to climb, again, based off of that N1, so it'll pitch as it needs to maintain those 30 knots. See, as we start to pitch up here, trying to maintain that 230 knots. Now we've increased, notice that once we pass a certain altitude, we now are allowed to fly faster based off of my FMC data, and now we will fly. It'll start pitching down just a little bit, as you saw. We were up here, but now we're down here, and it's going to slowly increase to 250 knots. Again, on vertical navigation. And as you can see, we are climbing out of the airport. And that's basically how Autopilot works on the climb out. Now, really, there's not much else to it except for showing you guys the different options here on the on here right here. So let's do this, for example. Let's do level change. All right, and let's do level change at, let's increase this to 270. You know, we can't go that fast yet. Let's do level change at 230 knots. What does that mean? Well, that means that it will pitch the aircraft. Turn off my lights now. Oops. That we are above the altitude. No, that stays on. That's fine. Yeah. All right. So it's going to pitch the aircraft as you see. Look at the vertical speed, how fast it is. How I mean, that's 4,000. It's ridiculous. Going up till it drops to 230 knots, right? Now, if I increase this to 200 and let's say 280 knots on level change, it's going to pitch down here, ignoring the vertical speed, to make sure that we are increasing our speed here till we reach 280 knots on our climb out. Isn't that neat? I think that's pretty neat. That allows you to kind of fine-tune your how quickly you're climbing using just the speed. You'll notice that the vertical speed, though, is a lot less now that we've done that. Now, if I wanted to reduce the speed from being N1, I could do so. I could select speed here. And when I do that, you'll notice that vertical speed has now become active. Because in the speed mode, it does not use N1, so you actually start controlling. There's no vertical navigation here. You start controlling your vertical speed as well. But if we switch back to N1, we can go back to vertical navigation, and it's going to fly itself without any type of input here. If I did want to do a vertical speed climb, I could do so. I could select vertical speed. Again, it's going to give me that speed on this side. And I say, let's climb at 3,000 feet per minute. Now you have to be careful because you may increase your vertical speed too much to where your speed can't be maintained. So you got to keep an eye on that. This is a little bit more manual of a climb here. Now I could say I want to only climb at 1,500 feet per minute, And you'll notice that the engines have started rolling back because the throttle is too much to maintain 288 knots. So the aircraft's trying to maintain 288 knots at the same time trying to maintain 1,500 feet per minute. So it's going to roll those engines back to try to maintain that rate. Now, if I were to say altitude hold, what's going to happen is it's going to automatically try to maintain our current altitude. Now, I hit that altitude at, let's see, about 300 something, 380, yeah. So it's going to try to maintain that altitude. I hit the altitude hold button on. Now that's, for example, if you're climbing up, there's an aircraft that comes over and you got to stop it. From climbing, you hit altitude hold real fast, and it's going to level off and prevent you from, colliding or something like that. Or maybe ATC says altitude, hold altitude or something. It gives you an option there. But if I wanted to continue climbing, again, there's several options. I can do vertical speed, I can do level change, or I can do VNAV. So I'm going to go back to VNAV and continue climbing up to 35,000 feet. Now, N1 is going to be, it's going to give your highest climb rate based off of the speed that is constrained in your climb of your FMC. So in your FMC, you have a climb button, and in here, you have a target speed for your climb, which is 288 knots or 0.764 Mach. And you'll see the speed restriction was reduced at 10,000 feet, means that you can go above 250 knots at 10,000 feet. And your climb rate is right here, 97.6% of N1, and you can see that we are at that, and that we are climbing at a good, decent rate here, and our speed is maintaining about 288 knots, which is what we want. So that's pretty much your climbs. I'll come back to you guys once we're about to get onto our descent here to kind of go through options for your descent. One thing I didn't cover, I should cover here real fast, is heading select. So if I want to do heading select here, let's go ahead and select, let's do 120. Heading select. This is going to allow me to manipulate the aircraft as I need to. I can say, I want you to fly, 080. Well, it's going to turn left until it hits 080. And if I wanted to go back right, I could say fly 160. It's going to, again, change its direction to 060. Now, watch the indicator here. It's not going to go past 25. Right? So look where it is. 25 degrees. That's 30 degrees, so it's at 25 degrees, exactly where it should be. Now if I say, whoa, let's bring it back a little bit. I don't want to be 25 degrees. I want you to stay at about 20 degrees. It's going to maintain 20 degrees on its turn, 15 degrees, or you can bring it all the way to 10 degrees if you so desire. So anyway, back to 25 here. We'll go back to lateral navigation, get it back on track as we climb out of here and head to Los Angeles. Hopefully this has helped on the ascent portion here. I'll be back, of course, as we get closer to descent to show you guys how you would use different descent modes, and of course then we'll get into the approach, the ILS approach into Los Angeles. Alright, we are getting close to our top of descent now, and we're going to cover a couple things here with Autopilot that you'll need to know when you're getting up to your descent phase. First thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to reduce your altitude to whatever ATC gives you, whether like this is to maintain 14,000 or what have you. If you're flying with ATC, you're going to set that altitude here. If you're not flying with ATC, the best altitude I suggest you do is the glide slope intercept altitude, which if I bring up the chart here for the ILS 25 left, which will be our ILS today, into Los Angeles, our glide slope intercept altitude is going to be 1,900 feet. Now, we may end up intercepting it before that, but that is the glide slope intercept point at 1,900 feet at Lima. So we're going to set it to 1,900 feet. So we'll go over to the MCP altitude, and we're going to set that down to 1,900 feet here. Now, on our descent, there's several options that we can use, of course, and those options are, we can use our level change, vertical navigation, and vertical speed. Just like we did with ascent, you can use those same things for descent. In general, I'll maintain vertical navigation as much as possible. If you're flying online, now you may have to ignore the vertical navigation. You might have to end up using vertical speed or level change or something like that to abide by what ATC is giving you for directions. But in general, if you're flying offline, you can use the vertical navigation for your descent. I will say this though, with the Boeing 737-800 Zibo Mod, it's a little bit slippery, so generally you're going to be descending pretty fast. I'm not sure if that's realistic to the actual Boeing 737, or if Zibo just hasn't quite gotten the flight model quite perfect yet. I'm not certain on that. That does mean though that you'll end up using some speed brakes on the way down quite a bit to maintain your speed in accordance with your FMC. With that being said, we are, let's see, about a little bit less than 25 miles away from the top of the descent. So once we get there, I'll come right back to you guys. Okay, we are less than 10 miles from top of the descent, so we'll be descending here momentarily. What I want you guys to pay attention to is that since I have set my MCP altitude below my current altitude, because I have vertical navigation on and armed, it will automatically start my descent. It's essential that you change your altitude, otherwise it will just go into altitude hold mode at your current altitude, ignoring your vertical navigation path, and will continue flying at whatever cruise altitude that you're at. For example, mine would be 35,000. But since I do have vertical navigation on, that it will automatically start descending once I reach the top of descent point. At the same time, you'll also notice that my speed will become the descent speed, which is set in my FMC, which you can change if you want in the descent page of the FMC. You'll also notice that this little thing right here, this is showing your deviation off of vertical path. Notice also that this has started to drop, letting you know that it's starting to descent here. And the vertical navigation has already kicked in, and we're already starting our descent. You'll notice the speed is creeping up, as I mentioned, so I am going to go ahead and add some speed brakes here to prevent us from going over speed. You'll notice that we have a Crowley waypoint restrictions of flight level 290 below or above flight level 260. You'll notice that this little green dot here is saying this top of descent at flight level 290, which means it's going to stop descending at 290, so that it abides by this waypoint here. Again, that is all off of vertical navigation. If I didn't use vertical navigation, it would ignore those constraints. So if I used level change or if I use vertical speed, those would completely ignore those constraints, and it'd be up to the pilot to make sure that they're abiding by the constraints on the waypoints. Now, it is possible that ATC could say, you know, disregard the constraints and descend to whatever altitude. That's completely possible. So keep that in mind as well. Once we get to this next top of descent, I'm going to show you guys how you can use the level change and vertical speed to actually descend as well. It's really simple. It does take some calculations if you're having to calculate at what speed will you be at, etc., altitudes. It does take a little bit more hands-on approach, the other two, but that's okay. If you like to have hands-on approach, that's a good option here. At the same time, sometimes it's required to maintain what ATC is requesting that you do. Alright, so I'm going to use vertical speed now. I'm going to select vertical speed. Notice that indicated airspeed is activated. And I'm going to use vertical speed here. We have to get down to 270. So we're going to do about 1,700 feet per minute. And we'll see. I'm probably going to have to increase that. Let's go about 2,000. And again, I'm looking at my vertical deviation and this little pink triangle here telling me about where I need to be at to actually make my descent work with those constraints. Let's give it just a little bit more juice here on the descent. Again, just abiding by this indicated airspeed here and what my vertical speed is. If I wanted to use level change, again, that would be switch over to level change here. It's going to go off 274 knots. It's going to maintain 274 knots to maintain. It doesn't care about my altitude. It's trying to maintain my speed on the descent. So if you wanted to make sure, hey, I want to descend at 290 knots, it's going to decrease that angle of attack to increase your feet per minute so that you get to 290 knots on your descent. I'm going to go back to vertical navigation and allow the aircraft to do what it needs to get down to what it needs to get down to. I'm also going to add just a little bit of speed brake here to slow us back down. So there you have it. There is your descent modes that you can use. Different options give you different things, and you can kind of go with what you want on that. I'm going to go ahead and you'll see me next when we get closer to the actual approach phase, where I'll show you how to use heading select, VOR lock, and the approach button on the ILS approach, and we'll cover that when we get closer. Alright everybody, we are getting close to our ILS approach here. We're about to be going parallel to the actual airport, which you can see right there. A couple things we need to cover here before we actually get to the point where we need to actually use the VOR lock and the ILS approach. First and foremost, you want to make sure that your actual navigation radio is set to the appropriate frequency for the VOR ILS. To do that, all you got to do is go to the lower panel here, and you'll see under nav, you'll have an active, you'll have a standby. One we're going to be using today is 109.90, and that's based off the chart, which I have off Navigraph here. You can see the ILS DME is 109.9, so we'll make that to the active 109.90. That is our active ILS frequency. We'll use that. Number two, we want to slow down here as we need to. We need to add the course here. You have to add the course. If you don't add the course, trust me, it will not align appropriately with the runway. So add the course of 251, and we'll put it on both sides here. Perfect. So now that we've got the ILS frequency dialed in, we've got the course dialed in, the only thing that we have to do now is continue flying our arrival, and then we'll make our turn onto the approach, and we'll do a VOR lock and APP approach into Los Angeles. So in the FMC tutorial that I covered, remember that I talked about the vector point and why I don't remove the vector point from my plan here. So you'll notice that I'm currently on the vector, and that is the straight off vector from my last waypoint. And so if I wouldn't have done that, I would have cut straight in here at a very acute angle to the runway, which definitely causes issues with your VOR lock and your approach. So I always recommend keeping that vector in there to allow you to at least get out to a 90 degree off of the waypoint there, to allow your aircraft to better capture the ILS or the VOR. I generally like to go a little bit past 90 degrees to come back in at a more obtuse angle to the runway to allow for a little bit better capture than even 90 degrees. Allows it to kind of ease in there rather than a hard turn. But again, that's going to be, if you're online flying with VATSIM or something like that, that's going to be dictated by the ATC. So with that being said, we are going to use heading select for this maneuver here. I am going to go ahead and select a little bit past 90 degrees here. And we'll do a heading select once we get to about where that waypoint is. So Heading select is going to start making its turn here. I'm also going to switch over to speed and vertical speed. So I'm going to start descending at about 1,000 feet per minute, and I'm going to decrease my speed to 180 knots. Same time, start dropping the flaps just a little bit here. Bring it just a little bit more. 180 should be fine. Go all the way to flaps 5 here. And we're going to send just a little bit more here. Go to about 1,500. Trying to get down to below 3,600, which is supposed to be at Honda waypoint. And this is why it's important to know what vertical speed does, know what the speed does, so it allows you to actually apply a good approach on the manual type style to get us aligned with the ILS. Again, you could just go straight off that waypoint, but again, I've had issues coming at an acute angle onto an ILS and VOR. It's had issues. Now what I'm looking for the VOR here is that right there. And hit VOR lock. I wanted to see that diamond start moving and a solid diamond start moving across that first dot. Reducing that. Decrease just a little bit here. Once we are on the VOR lock, notice that we overshot it a little bit, which is not uncommon if you're coming at a large, almost a direct perpendicular angle to the runway. But it'll get back on, no problems here. I'm going to go ahead and reduce my vertical speed now to 700 feet per minute, and I'm going to activate the approach button to allow it to capture the glide slope when it can. Once I capture the glide slope, I'm going to maintain 180 knots until I get approximately 5 miles out from the runway, at which point I'll drop my landing gear and I'll decrease my speed down to my final approach speed, which today will be 147 knots. We're looking for this runway right here, 25 left. That's what we're looking for. And again, we're on VOR lock right now, MCP speed. And once we hit the actual, once we capture the glide slope, this will switch from VS. It'll switch from VS to GS, means glide slope. And again, we'll maintain exactly what we're on right now. It's perfect, perfectly flying in, no issues here. Once we get 5 miles out, we'll drop our landing gear.
1,000 to go.
1,000 feet to go, which means that, again, based off my MCP altitude that I've set, it would not go below 1,900 feet. But we've captured the glide slope now, so I'm going to increase my altitude to my go-around altitude, which today is 3,000. I'm going to allow it to bring us in here. And again, 5 miles out from the runway, I am going to go ahead and drop my landing gear and drop my flaps to 30 degrees. Alright, so I'm going to decrease my speed now to 147, which is my final approach speed here. At Lima, I'm 5 miles out, so once I hit Lima, alright, I hit Lima, so gear's coming down. And flaps are coming down as well. I did forget to put my landing gear on, landing lights on. Totally forgot about that, and that was mainly because I was focusing on talking to y'all during the descent and stuff like that, but that's okay. Make sure you put your landing lights on at 10,000 feet. Go ahead and arm my spoilers as well. Now I could let this fly all the way in. I'm not going to do that today. I am going to take it onto a manual fly now. I like to, if I got visuals here, I like to fly visual approach.
Minimums.
And I didn't set my minimums either. My bad, guys. Bad example of a ILS approach is this. Minimums, basically, that is your minimums that you can actually, that you have to be able to see the runway, and that is based off of what's put on the charts itself. I'll make sure I don't make that mistake again whenever I the gust of wind there. Don't make that mistake again whenever I fly the full flight tutorial that I'll be doing, combining all of this information together. So you'll see that appropriately. But this will get you there anyway.
300.
Now remember, just because I disconnected autopilot does not mean
200.
that my auto throttle's off. So my auto throttle's still on. So about
100.
here's good. I'll turn off my auto throttle.
50.
And then over
40,
threshold, kill
30,
the engines completely.
10.
And flare. Bit of a long one here, no big deal. And we're on the ground. And reverses out. So yeah, that's how you fly an ILS approach. Not very hard once you get used to it. Knowing the autopilot is essential, which is why I included it in this particular tutorial here, to fly appropriate ILS into an airport. With that being said, of course, I did make a couple mistakes that I am not ashamed to admit that I did make. And those, of course, are going to be the fact I did not include the minimums on the PFD. But to set your minimums, all you do is right here. You put it on the barometric and you set your minimums according to the charts, which according to the ILS approach here into LAX, look down here. So there we go. Would have been 340, so we would have set it to 304, I should say. Then 304 would have been my maximum minimums into Los Angeles, and that of course is not with that is not a category 3 landing, which that runway is capable of. Anyway, I hope this has helped you guys. If you guys have any questions, of course, leave it in the comments down below. And don't forget, guys, that you allow me to continue to do this, and you do that by supporting me over at patreon.com/mmflightclub for as little as $3 a month. You can help me continue to make videos like this and get more content out there, more aircraft that I can fly so I can do tutorials on those, like the Rotate MD-80. I've been wanting to get that aircraft, just don't have the money for it. Things like that, and doing reviews and stuff, of course. If you guys like to join my Discord, you can do so as well. Links will be in the description down below for all of that information. If you guys can always ask me questions there as well, and I'll do my best to answer them. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time up in the sky.